All right, y'all, we're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover in this hour. So, good morning to y'all. Thanks to Amanda and Sally for agreeing to do this DDRLF Downtown Development Revolving Loan Fund webinar. And Amanda's going to kick it off, and then Sally will follow. If y'all have questions, y'all can certainly raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat, and we will read those questions out at moments when there's the speaker's taking a little bit of a break and ask those questions for you. All
All
right,
right.
Amanda.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Good morning. My name's Amanda Glover, and I'm the director of the Downtown Development Authority here in Bainbridge, Georgia. And this is just a little bit of a process that I've tried to walk through with our developers that are working on a project in our downtown, that I work through with them to get things going. So follow me along, and then if you have any questions, just please let me know. The first kind of thing I do is obviously is the initial project assessment. I meet with that prospective developer and to make sure their project meets the criteria for what the steps are within the DDRLF. I explain the loan process to ensure them that they have to totally understand that funds are not available until the project's completed and it has been issued a CO. Another very important thing I go over is the 50, the 40, and the 10% financing structure. And I just normally kind of work through it with them just based on a $100,000 project, just for easy numbers' sake. And tell them that 40% portion, if you're a Main Street community, is typically around a 2% interest rate for that 40% portion of the total project cost. So that's my first meeting with the developer. And then we schedule a site visit for your DCA regional rep to come, and we introduce them. And at that time, we have the IPA application complete so that regional rep can review everything on site, tour the project, and ask any questions that they may have at that particular time. Moving on, once that you visit with the regional rep, you finish the IPA application and get that submitted. You just embrace the waiting process and to hear back from DCA as far as if you have a successful IPA and they've asked you to move forward with the final application. But a lot of times during this process, I start working with the developer to looking at the final application and just to start gathering basic information to make sure they've got their financials or their tax returns all in order. Just stay in a communication with them about finalizing their project budget, because if you do get a favorable report back from IPA to from the IPA to submit a final application, then at least you're a little bit forward in being able to in the process of completing the final application. Let's see. And it just helps give you a quick turnaround for submitting that final application. But if the IPA comes back and they say it's not a project that was going to fit within their criteria, the worst part is you have your basic information down as far as how that project fits within your downtown area or about your downtown master plan, because those questions aren't going to change significantly from time to time you do an application. So at least you've got that basis information ready to go for future applications. And then at that point, if you do get a favorable commitment, then you start working and submitting the final DDRLF application. Section B is a portion of the application that I sit down with the developer and we go through and mark off who's responsible for what questions, because they obviously know their project very well and they give a description of it all. But then with our background and your background of knowing about a downtown development project, you've got to tweak it a little bit to make it sense for the people reviewing the application. And I sit down with them and go through the entire source and use statement to make sure they understand that they're asking for the right amount of money that they need to begin with. Because if you don't ask for what you need, you're not going to be able to go back and ask for additional dollars. So that's very important. I've had that happen time and time again. I'm like, no, you need to make sure you are requesting what you need. And because you might request the full 250, but at that time you might only get a 200 as far as a reward, the contract award. So be careful with making sure they understand that very, very important. Step 5, so you hear back, and that's probably, I think it's around what is it, a 3 to 6 month turnaround time for receiving the statement of contract award. At that time, make sure you review any special conditions that have been attached with that, and work with the developer, make sure they stay on task when they get started. And in the next page, I'll kind of go over a few little things. Let's see. Here we go. On step 6, I've created just a personal spreadsheet that has the project name, the address, what the loan closing date is, the year it was awarded, the total project cost, the amount of that funding, and amount of the local financing, and what that project number is, just so I have all that information readily available to me and not having to go through all these different files and figure out what's what. But in addition, I like to be able to track the economic contributions that these projects have made to our downtown. So that's one reason I keep that spreadsheet. And then step 7, when you get your contract and statement award, there's going to be resolution samples that they were going to want you to submit to your city council and to your DDA. So you need to get those on the agendas. The city resolution endorses the development of the project, and the DDA resolution, because normally your DDA is the applicant, it authorizes the acceptance of the loan from DCA. So you do have to have these resolutions at closing. Step 8, the kind of thing, next thing I do is just stay informed about the project's progress. Keep in touch with the developer to make sure they're staying on budget, their timeline is, they're meeting their deadlines and their timelines. So if you have that, when the loan closing date's supposed to be, but the project's not complete, that's the whole part of being in constant contact and communication with DCA. You can request an extension. You just have to submit a formal letter for that. But because we all know things happen during the project process and things get delayed, or materials get delayed, or contractors, or you never know what the case may be. But just the communication process through in that interim time of construction is very important. And then also, DCA has what they loan closing guidelines. So I also share that with the developer. So through the process of construction, they know what they need to keep up with as far as documentation, as for any cost, consists of invoices, as well as any copies of any kind of canceled checks and paid invoices. So they're able to keep themselves organized throughout the process. So when it's time to start gathering their loan closing documents, it's a little bit easier for them on the tail end of the project. And then the next thing is the project's completed. I normally attend the closing unless it's done virtually or just digitally. And at that time, I get photos of the developers and the closing attorney and everybody involved, and share that project on social media, and market that, and what a great project that has happened in our community. So these are just real quickly the steps that I kind of run through with working with somebody downtown, and I'll kind of share some different projects for some examples. This particular one is the Fleming building at the time, and right now this was done in 2018, and this is where Southern Philosophy Brewing Company is located. And so you can see there before, and they totally rehabbed the facade. And they do have an outdoor beer garden in the back where they've built an outdoor stage. We have a public alley that runs the Broad Street alley back there in the back. And this is just a little spreadsheet that's kind of a source and use statement that shows how this project occurred. So they acquired the building for $44,200. FFE was just over 141,000, and that's the portion that Firstport City Bank, this particular bank, committed to, and that's 50% of the project cost. And the next portion is the rehab of over 148,000, and that's the 40% portion, and that's the section that's at 2% interest. And then the local bank works out their own rate with that developer. But knowing you're going in with that 40% portion, and that's the incentive, obviously, is that 2%. And then the 10% is the owner's equity injection into the project. Another example is the Alderman that we have right on our town square. This is just kind of a variation of the way the building itself has emerged over the years. You see the McDonald Hardware building, then it progresses over at the cornice and the pediments and everything at the top of the building have been removed. And then you see in the bottom left corner, the Alderman, what it looked like. Well, this is a photo in the 2000s, but in the 1940s, this is the building transformed into what you see here. And this is the building that our Downtown Development Authority purchased. And we worked with the local, and we have a buyback clause in our contracts now that if when you purchase the building, you don't start construction within a year's time or within a reasonable amount of time, we do have a buyback clause where we can buy the building back. In this particular case, the first person that bought it from us, the building was going into foreclosure. And we worked with the local bank and they were willing to loan us the money, but we didn't have to make any loan payments or any interest payments for 1 year. And we had 1 year to sell the building. And so literally probably a week within that year's time frame, we were able to resell the building to another developer that has done a beautiful job. You can see here in the top left corner, the facade, the way it looks today. They have 5 apartments upstairs on the second floor, and this is an example of one of the apartments. And they converted back into 3 distinct commercial units that historically had been there. We've got 2 great women's boutiques, Rivers and Bridge and South Apparel. And today there's a new business actually opening up in the middle section called Muse on Broad. It's a variation of clothing, homewares, gifts, men's. It's a whole combination of all kind of great items for the community. So this one kind of breaks down. They actually utilize the Georgia Cities Foundation and the Ddrlf. So they acquired that building from us for $203,000, and the bank committed their portion of $700,000. The rehab was over 1.7, and the GCF committed 200, and the Ddrlf committed 250,000. And the owner's equity injection into it is over 830. So that was for nearly a $2 million project that right here on the square in downtown Bainbridge. And I think that is really all I have. I know that was really quick and easy, and but it does take a little bit of a while to go through the process. But if you ever have any questions, DCA is always great to meet with you and answer any of those questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate that. Amanda has submitted a lot of Ddrlf applications, so I wanted her to share her experience with y'all since she has done so many and has always submitted great applications. So thank you for sharing with us, Amanda. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sally Maroose, who's the Ddrlf manager, to walk us through tips and the application. So Amanda, if you will stop sharing and then Sally can begin.
Okie dokie, sorry. Is that good?
Good morning, everybody. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. And can you all see my, hang on just a second. Trying to make it so that you all can see it bigger. Does that look okay? Is it a split screen again, or can you all see just my slide?
If you'll go under display settings and
Okay,
make it
all right, so
big.
it did that again. All right, is that better? Okay, thank you, everybody.
Perfect.
All right, it's been a while since I did one of these PowerPoints. But anyway, thank you everybody for joining. And that was a great presentation that Amanda gave, and she did a good job explaining all those various steps to go through. And I'm just gonna give you all a little more detail about the process, the eligibility, and so forth. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of Ddrlf and what the eligibility criteria are. And this litmus test is something that I actually came up with a few months ago when I was doing a little training for our regional reps, but I think it could be helpful for you at the DDAs and the Main Street programs as well. And then we'll just briefly talk about, oh, and after the litmus test, I am going to give you a brief little snapshot of a project that we did that involved both Ddrlf and GCF. And then we'll just talk about the process, the players, and then I'm going to actually try to toggle back and forth between my PowerPoint and the IPA and application forms to give you all a little more step-by-step guidance on how you would go about filling those out. So without further ado, let me go ahead and continue here. So the Ddrlf program here in a nutshell, the basic purpose of it obviously is very similar to what the purpose is for those of you that work with downtown development authorities and Main Street programs, and that is to revitalize and strengthen and enhance these downtown areas. I bet a lot of you attended the Gainesville conference, and we know from some of the presentations at that Gainesville conference that downtown development isn't just about making a pretty place to shop. It really does build economic development in the communities. It generates a lot of private investment. It generates jobs. And so really this is the main purpose of our Ddrlf yes, it is to revitalize the downtown areas and beautify them, but it's also to spur economic development and jobs. And we do this with what we call below market rate gap financing. And I'll go into a little more explanation later on what we mean by gap. But typically, so here, let me go ahead and go into the basics there. So Ddrlf is capped at $250,000 per project. We also have a rough minimum that we shoot for. We normally do not participate in projects that are asking for less than 50,000. We normally don't have that problem. Normally people are not asking less than that. But right now we're capped at 250,000. Interest rates are 2 or 3%. If your community is a Main Street program, and you do have to be a participant. I don't think this applies to affiliates. I think if you have been given the Main Street designation or the Plan First designation, then you get the 2% interest rate. Everybody else gets 3%. Either way, it's very competitive, and that's why this program is just so attractive to people and so helpful, really. Okay, I love how Amanda pointed this out. We do have a typical financing structure of 50-40-10. So we typically like to see that minimum borrower investment of 10% of the total project cost. So if it was a $100,000 project where like the total cost was, 100,000, we would want to see that borrower putting in 10,000. We typically do try to limit the Ddrlf participation to no more than 40% of what the total project cost is. And then we typically want about half of that financing coming from the bank. And that's what we mean by gap financing. Every now and then we do get people coming to us and saying that they want to pursue Ddrlf. And when they show us the source and use, it will have only borrower equity and Ddrlf and no bank financing. And we don't really participate in those. We really do want to see that the borrower has done a little bit of homework, that they've already gone to a bank, and that the bank is at least willing to participate. So we come in where there's a gap between the total project cost and what the bank and the borrower can provide. So that's where our gap comes in. And let me know if you all have any questions about that or if that's confusing or anything. Another thing that Amanda pointed out that I think is very important for both the DDA and the borrower to remember is that we're not your quick fix. Our loans close after all the project activities are complete. So once the building has been acquired and all of the renovation has been complete and the certificate of occupancy has been issued, that's when our loan closes. So it's important for the borrower to know that because they will have to line up interim financing. And another thing I wanted to point out too is that, yes, it is frequent that you will sometimes see DDRLF and GCF combined on a project. And the cool thing about that is that you can get 250,000 from DDRLF and anywhere from 200,000 to 250,000 from GCF. So you can get almost $500,000 of low interest financing, which is really cool. But here's another thing I wanted to point out to you. DDRLF is fairly focused in its mission and in its purpose. So we do tend to be a little discerning about the projects we participate in. So we want to see that the building is in that historic downtown core. We want to see that there's, the gap there, that the bank is involved. And every now and then a project will, and also too, in our projects, we need to see that the DDA is very involved and is going to act as the applicant. And I'll go into that in a little more detail later. But we every now and then run into projects that sound really good, but maybe the DDA is not terribly active and they don't want to act as the applicant, or maybe it's just a little bit outside that core historic downtown area. And then in those situations, we would recommend that the people maybe check out GCF instead of DDRLF. So we work pretty closely with Chris Higdon and Cindy Eidson of GCF. And sometimes if we think a project really has merit, but maybe isn't the best fit for DDRLF, we might recommend that those people reach out to GCF. And sometimes GCF can be a good option when DDRLF is not. So we go. So here's your eligibility criteria. When you all, I'm sure by now, most of you have probably skimmed through the application and IPA form, and maybe even some of you went to our website and actually looked at our program rules. In those documents, you may see references to eligible applicants being a city or a county, and that sometimes there are references to, we can work with, the city being the applicant for a publicly owned building. I just wanted to set the record straight that currently, right now, the way that we're running DDRLF, the focus and the priority for management here at DCA is that we really do prefer to see the applicant be and I wrote development authority. Most of the time it's a DDA. Most of the time it's a downtown development authority. Every now and then it's a regular development authority. But right now we are working almost exclusively with projects where the DDA is the applicant and then the end borrower is a private sector business that's trying to fix up a building where there will be, in most cases, that building is privately owned and managed for like retail or residential units or that type of thing. So I wanted to point that out. And then let me point out a few more things. So these are the eligible activities. So DDRLF could, we can fund acquisition. Most of the time, DDRLF is funding construction and renovation and rehab type activities. Every now and then on a limited basis, we've seen DDRLF get spent on maybe machinery and equipment, but that's a little more rare. Typically, our money is usually going into construction and renovation. And then I just wanted to point out the things that are not eligible. DDRLF cannot be used for working capital or refinancing another loan or administrative costs of running your program or the project. So I see Tracy
has a
do you have a question, Tracy?
Yeah, I thought since I have so many of these scenarios in Region 3 that maybe you can restate the eligible applicants again so as to make it clear when the DDA owns the building and it's a public building that that does not work for us currently.
Right. Yes. So thank you for pointing that out. So I actually worked with DDRLF a long time ago, like 10 or 15 years ago, briefly. And then Sheree had it for a while, and then I've got it back. Many, many years ago, we actually did do a few projects where like maybe the city owned the building and they got a DDRLF and they used it to like fix it up and turn it into, I don't know, a visitor center or some type of whatever local government type use. We really are getting away from that right now. Management has made it pretty clear to me and to my team that they really want the end borrower to be a private business. Now, in rare instances, they will consider projects where maybe the DDA owns the building, but then they want to see that the DDA owns the building but is leasing it to a end borrower business who will then make the Ddrlf loan payments. So that's kind of rare. We don't see as many of those. So we can participate if the DDA owns the building, but only if they are leasing that building to a private sector business that, say, is going to run a restaurant or a boutique hotel or something like that. If the DDA owns the building and they want Ddrlf money to fix it up so they can put their Main Street office in there, that's not going to work, and that won't be considered. So I'd say in like 90% or more of our cases, it really is a private entity that owns the building. And then they're either going to use it for their business, or sometimes they lease it to somebody else who uses it for a private business. But we'll consider, like I said, a building that's owned by the DDA, but only if they're leasing it to that private sector business who will act as the end borrower. So did that answer the question? Okay, good. Good. Yeah, and I know we've been getting a lot of inquiries about that. So it's just good to kind of establish that we want that. I think the management here is just really putting a lot of emphasis on helping small businesses get out there and have access to good low interest financing, and just, you know, building those jobs, building that private investment in these downtown areas. So, any more questions about that? Okay. All right, I'll keep on going. Okay, so this is sort of like a litmus test that I came up with to help regional reps. This was a few months ago. Like, how do you know? How do you know if a project is a good fit for Ddrlf, or if they should maybe be encouraged to check out other funding options? But I thought this would be good for you all who work at DDAs and Main Streets to know this as well. I mean, I think the first thing that's really important for people to know is that Ddrlf is not really a quick fix. This is not going to be quick money for people who are like, oh, I'm in the middle of my project and all of a sudden I found out that, you know, the roof repair is going to cost twice as much as I thought it would because the contractor found way more damage up there than they thought. Like, the whole process from beginning to end, like from doing the initial project assessment to getting invited to turn in an application to getting the award and then closing, like just going from light bulb to award, that can take a few months, best case scenario, but then like our funds won't even close until all the renovation activities are complete. So it's not really quick money, it's permanent financing for Ddrlf. So these are the questions that you would want to hopefully have a yes answer to. Is this property located pretty much, like, we're looking for properties that are in that heart of downtown, that historic area where most of the buildings were built, you know, about 100 years ago or so or more. So we really want this to be the heart. You're not going to be using Ddrlf for, you know, fixing up something that's in a strip center that's, you know, a couple miles outside of downtown. So location is important. But with all of y'all working with DDAs and Main Street programs, I think hopefully most of the requests that come to you are going to fall into that category. I put these bullets up here at the same time because the borrower needs to realize that this is usually a 50, and again, this was already mentioned a couple times, but we're looking for that 50-40-10 scenario. We want the borrower to put in at least 10% of the total project cost of their own cash equity, their skin in the game. And also, too, there should be some bank financing involved. So the answer to those questions should be yes. And again, to a new project, because every now and then we get requests where somebody will already be like halfway through the project and they thought they had all the financing, but then they run into like some weird wrinkle where something that they're trying to renovate or fix took more to repair or renovate than they thought. We generally don't like to come into projects in the middle like that. GCF might have a little more flexibility with that, but we want to see that this is either a new project where you're just getting started on taking a blighted or a vacant building and wanting to fix it up and rehab it, or you might have a building that you already rehabbed it, but then now all of a sudden there's a new scope. Like maybe you decided, oh, well, you know what? I already started to rehab this restaurant, but now I realize I want to do this other, like I was able to acquire like this extra piece of land or building, and now I'm going to put like a whole different, I'm going to put like a whole new outdoor patio section that we were not considering before. In a situation like that, then maybe we could consider coming in with a project that was already underway. So like, again, either a new project or new scope. All right, this is kind of important. Is the borrower willing to comply with the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabbing historic properties? And we're primarily interested with the exterior. We know that a lot of these projects involve both outside and inside changes. We don't look we're not going to be quite as strict about what's going on the inside, but the exterior of the building should not violate anything that's in those Secretary of Interior standards, because one of the purposes to this project, again, is to enhance downtown historic areas. So we want to see that these renovations are going to remain true to that, to the historic nature of the building and the surrounding area. And on our website, we have a link to the entire document for the Secretary of Interior. And I believe we also have a link to a one-page guidance sheet that the state of Georgia has put together. So that one-page sheet is just a good reference guide if you don't want to get overwhelmed looking at this Secretary of Interior website.
And Sally,
And then,
if they
yes.
have any questions about what work they're going to do, can they run that by you?
Yes,
To
yeah,
determine.
exactly. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. If your borrower or you have any questions about the exterior renovations, you can bring those questions to me, and then I will forward them to the historic preservation context that we have here at DCA. We have like a whole division of historic preservation experts, and I can always bring the questions to them, and they're always very good and very thorough about getting back to me and telling me, well, this would be okay, but they can't do this to the windows, or this has to remain relatively unchanged. And then I would bring that guidance back to the DDA and the borrower. And this last bullet point, this is sort of a given. I mean, I'm assuming that with you all here that are on this webinar today, that more than likely you're going to be supportive of the project and be willing to act as the applicant. All right, so here's what I think I'm going to do. I think what I had next was an example. So I think my next slide is an example of a project that passed all of these little questions in the litmus test with a caveat on one. All right, so here we go. So, and this is in my original slide. Okay, it's all good. So this project actually was done about 4 or 5 years ago in the city of Dublin. There were two buildings that were side by side, the Corker building and the Kingfisher building. This is what one of them looked like back in the day. So this project came to us in 2019. There were two buildings. 115 West Jackson was the Corker building. 117 West Jackson was the Kingfisher building. These projects were really significant, or these buildings were significant to Dublin because they were, apparently, I was reading up on this, and apparently there was a really big fire in Dublin that destroyed many of the downtown buildings in 1898. And so these two buildings, the Corker building and the Jackson building, were built shortly after that, like in the 1903 timeframe. And as you can see, back in the day, they were pretty attractive. Like to me, the black and white, that looks pretty nice. Then I believe like sometime maybe in the 60s or 70s, they came along and put like this not terribly attractive facade on it. And so they came to DCA and GCF and said, hey, we want to fix these two buildings up. They're right next to each other. There's a synergy there. We're going to fix both of these up at the same time. And so this is a good, I wanted you all to see the list of sources here because the total project cost was $2.4 million. This was a really good example of Ddrlf and GCF partnering together. The borrower put in their equity and then they got financing from the bank of about $1.7 million. Now, there's a little caveat here that I want to point out where I know in the last slide, I just got done telling you we need to have minimum 10% borrower equity. Here they came in a little lower than that. 10% of 2.4 million would have been 240,000. But as you can see, I think that's offset by the fact that they had a lot of bank financing. And I know that now in the current time, 2025, I've been advised by management that they really do want to kind of hold firm to that minimum 10% equity by the borrower. So let me show you some of these after pictures. Okay, so these are after pictures, an exterior one and an interior one. And you can see it's absolutely beautiful. And I actually, believe it or not, got these pictures from the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation site because they actually featured this project on their website as a really successful example of rehabbing and renovating an historic building in a very attractive way that was very true to its historic legacy. So I just thought that was really cool that a project that Ddrlf and GCF participated in was actually featured on the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation. So kudos to Dublin for doing a good job with that. Does anybody have any questions or should I keep going? I'll keep on going. I don't see any hands raised. All right. So this is my flow chart, which I don't like as much as the one that Amanda put on was more detailed, and I actually like that. This is the simple one, to just the quick and dirty, so that nobody gets like overwhelmed. But I do also like the one that Amanda had because she had some of that extra detail in there. So before you even complete the IPA, it is a good idea for the borrower to do a little homework. And I'm going to go into a little more detail on this too later on in a few other slides. But generally speaking, the borrower should have a property in mind that they either have already acquired or are very interested and have a chance in acquiring, like they may have already made an offer on it or it's for sale. Ideally, the borrower should have an overall idea of what the total project cost is. Like, how much is it going to cost you overall to buy this project, buy this property, fix it up, put whatever machinery and equipment or furniture and fixtures are required. And then ideally, also the borrower would have already maybe talked to a bank too to say, hey, Mr. Bank, can you provide me some funding on this? I am going to look at a Ddrlf, but I need to have some bank financing too. Can you help me out? And so forth. So once the borrower hopefully does a little bit of homework, then at that point, they start talking to their DDA. The DDA and the borrower both should be agreeing that this is a good project. We want to pursue this for our city. And then at that point, you could either reach out to me and ask me questions, but you do also need to reach out to that regional rep that serves your area. And I know that you all were provided that really pretty color map that shows all of the different regions in DCA and the rep who serves each one. You're going to reach out to that regional rep and they're going to come by and do what we call an IPA site visit. And we would like for that site visit to be conducted before the IPA gets sent in to DCA. Every now and then we get the IPA first, and that's fine. We can work with that. But then I'm just going to call the regional rep and say, hey, can you visit this project before I really move forward with having us issue our IPA response letter? So your IPA will get processed more quickly if you make sure that the regional rep comes out there and does the site visit first. So if we respond positively to that IPA, then you will work on the application. I want to put, and I will go into this in more detail in a few minutes. The IPA, we want you, the people, the staff members at the DDA and the Main Street programs, to not be too overwhelmed with this process. And this is what I tell people a lot when we just get initial inquiries, is that the IPA is actually very simple and easy. The application is going to require a little more paperwork and a little more effort, especially from the borrower, but the IPA should be fairly quick and fairly easy for both the borrower and the DDA. It's really just a project description, a source and use. If you have a preliminary funding letter from the bank, great. It's not required, but if you have it, you can attach that. And then there's a signature page that has to be signed by the city, the DDA, and the borrower. And the IPA is also non-binding too. I think it's important to know that. So if you turn in an IPA and DCA says, yeah, this looks eligible, this looks good, turn in a formal app. And then after that, the borrower's like, oh, like, I got too much going on in my personal life all of a sudden. I got to postpone this project by a year, or oops, you know, my other business over here is kind of struggling. I can't really do this right now. It's non-binding. We do occasionally have projects where they come in, they turn in their IPA, we give it a positive response and say you can turn in an app, and then we never get an app. And that's okay. And there's no penalty or anything for that. Okay. Now, if they come a year later and say, oh, we do want to turn in that app after all, we will make you turn in a new IPA because it's been so long. I think we'll hang on to an IPA for 6 months before we make you redo it. But I just want to point out that the IPA is fairly simple and it is non-binding. So just think about that and make sure that, you know, we just want to make sure that the DDA and the Main Street and the borrower are just not getting too overwhelmed with all this. And then again, with the award, the DDA is going to submit the app. There'll be credit underwriting on all of the financials that the borrower submits. Then once the credit analysis is done, that's when the managers and I look at the project. If everything looks good, there's an award. The DDA has to sign the award. There's also a sub-borrower acknowledgement form that goes out at the time of award, and the borrower needs to sign that and send that back to us. And then you close within a year. So I'm going to go into a little more detail about this. So who are the players in all this? I thought it'd be a good idea to tell you who the player, I mean, you all know who the players are, but we're going to break down who does what when, and ideally, who should be doing what. So as you can see here at the top, it starts with the local business or borrower. This is what I like about Ddrlf. You know, we work with a lot of grant programs at DCA where it kind of comes from the top down, especially like with Edge and Reba and stuff like that. The cool thing about Ddrlf is that this is a bottoms up program. This is truly locally driven. This is going to be your mom and pops, your local businesses, your entrepreneurs, people that just have a dream and a vision and they're go-getters. So it's going to start with them. They're going to have a dream, a vision. They're going to have their eye on a property. They're going to come to you, ideally, the local government, city and DDA, and talk about their dream. And hopefully you all are going to be together or on the same page with thinking, yep, this is what our downtown needs. We're going to go for it. Then you're going to pull in your DCA regional rep. And it's okay to call me too. Like you can call me too if you have questions about the project. Is this eligible? Is this going to work? But before you turn in that IPA, you definitely need to get that regional rep involved. And a lot of times if I get email inquiries from people, I will respond and then courtesy copy the regional rep who serves that region. And then from there, the paperwork comes to our DCA Atlanta office people, PM, program manager, that is myself. Office of Credit Services gets involved during the formal app stage. And then here, the reason why I said optional here is because Georgia Cities Foundation and the SSBCI State Small Business Credit Initiative, these are other potential sources of funding which can sometimes participate concurrently with Ddrlf or in lieu of Ddrlf if your project is not a good fit for Ddrlf. So I wanted to break out the difference in the responsibilities between the DDA and the borrower. So the DDA, you're always going to be supporting your local businesses. You want to keep them informed of all of the different funding sources because it's not just Ddrlf. There's GCF, there's SSBCI, there might even be SBA loans out there too. This is where your regional reps come in because when your regional reps come and pay a visit, they can talk not only about Ddrlf, but about some of these other funding programs that I mentioned as well. The DDA will coordinate and sign and send in these the IPA and the app. And we do ideally want that DDA to be the main point of contact. So this is what the borrower is going to do. Ideally, the borrower will do a little bit of homework first. They'll pick a property, they'll figure out what that total project cost is, and they'll line up or at least try to talk to a bank about providing some financing, and they need to be willing to put in their equity. I get a lot of, and this is something I'm going to emphasize on this slide and the next couple slides. I get borrowers trying to email me IPA forms and application. And I would really, here at DCA, we really want the local government unit to be the lead, because with Ddrlf, the local government is technically the applicant. With GCF, I'm pretty sure the borrower goes directly to GCF. The DDA needs to be informed, they need to be kept in the loop, but the borrower can go directly to GCF and be the direct applicant on that. But with Ddrlf, we really need that DDA to be the intermediary. We make our loan to the DDA, and then the DDA turns the funds over to the borrower. So we really want the borrower, as eager beaver as he or she may be, to let the DDA kind of drive the train. But the borrower can be responsive and collaborative and provide the DDA the information that we need on those forms. And the IPA is very simple. So really the borrower just needs to provide a source and a use and a good project description for that. And then in the full application stage, that's where the borrower is going to have to do a little more legwork with the financials that we request for our credit team. So I'm going to keep on. Yes.
Sally, one thing that comes up a lot is at the full application stage, oftentimes the developer is not comfortable giving all their financial documents to the DDA. So in that case, they can send in those, they can email those documents directly to you, correct? Rather than,
yes,
you know, it's
definitely
just confidential information that they don't want the DDA or Main Street Director to see.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I actually was going to mention that later, but that's good. It's good to, I think it bears repeating, because that is a good point. Some of this financial data that we ask for is sort of sensitive. And so we do tell people that that could be sent directly to DCA as opposed to having to go through the development authority. So I will, and that actually is a good segue for the next project or the next slide that I have here. So this, again, I just want to point out that IPA is simpler. The DDA is always the driver. We want you in the driver's seat. It really, you're going to get a good project description. Hopefully the borrower will help provide that to the DDA, and the source and use statement will come from the borrower. The signature page on the IPA has to be signed by 3 separate entities. And in a minute here, I'm going to toggle over to a, I'm going to actually toggle over my screen to a copy of the IPA for you all. But that signature page is going to be signed by all 3. And again, the person who submits it is the DDA, ideally, not the borrower, as eager as they may be. So what I would like to do here is I would like to toggle over to an actual IPA form itself. Do you all see a copy of the IPA now on the screen?
Yes.
And I'm trying to get up to the first page. Okay, good. All right, so here's your IPA. On the first page here, it says that you can email it to oed@dca.ga.gov. That's fine. You can do that, but you can also email it directly to me. And most of the time, people do email it directly to me. If you send it to OED, it's going to go to our admin staff first, and then from there, they'll make sure I get it. But either way is fine. So basically, your project description and all of these other questions like 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, a lot of that, the development authority will have to rely on the borrower to provide. I will say this much, you you who work at the DDA and the Main Street programs, you should have a good idea of what your current initiatives are. You should have a good idea of current plans and endeavors in the downtown area to revitalize it and make it vibrant and beautiful. And you should be able to talk about how this particular project supports that. Okay. Source and use. This definitely needs to come from the borrower, from the private business. And you'd be surprised at the number of source and use statements that I get where the bottom totals are not like, so just double check these. Make sure that all the individual amounts that you put in here in these categories, that they are added up correctly, because I do get a lot of source and use statements where the total that's stated down here is not the correct total for all the amounts above it. So make sure that all the amounts are totaled correctly for the bottom, and make sure that your total costs are equal to your total sources. And what I do tell people all the time is that I realize it might be a little bit awkward to try to print this out and maybe handwrite stuff in there. If the borrower or even the DDA, like if they want to come up with their own table that's in an Excel spreadsheet that can do all the totaling and adding for them, or like in a word table or something like that, that's fine. I can accept that. It does not have to be on this exact page. If it's easy for you to come up with your own digital table in Excel or Word, that's totally fine. Okay. So like, again, so it's going to be that source and use statement is going to be a good project. I'd say that in order to put enough detail in the project description to answer those questions, it's going to be about at least 2 pages long. And we do especially want to know about the timeline, how long this is going to take, when you think the business might be open for operation, that kind of thing. It is helpful for us to have a map that shows like where this property is in relation to the downtown area. And if you even have like maybe 1 or 2 snapshots of what the building looks like now, that's helpful to have. And this is important too. I wanted to talk about this signature page, because we do frequently get IPAs that just get emailed directly to us from the borrower, and the borrower is the only person who signed it. And it is very important that we have, like, we don't consider this as complete, and we don't even start working with it until all 3 parties have signed it. So you need the DDA to sign it. You need a local government official, such as maybe a city manager or an assistant city manager or a mayor, to sign it. And then also the business signs it. Very frequently, we see the borrower putting their contact data up here. And I mean, I don't know about how it was with you, Cherie. I mean, I still want to consider the DDA as the main point of contact. So I personally would prefer that the contact email and phone number and all that really be the DDA. But if the borrower wants to put their contact data on there, that's fine as well. But ideally, this really should be the DDA that's putting their contact date on there. Because if I have a question about the IPA, I'm going to contact the DDA first. So do I have any questions about that yet? Does anybody have any questions about that? And I just want to emphasize the IPA is designed to be pretty simple. And like I said, it's non-binding. So even if the DDA or the borrower changes their mind about the project, even after DCA responds to it, it's no worries, no penalty.
I did want to see if anybody had any questions. We have 5 minutes left, but did want to let you know that if you have, some very specific questions, that Sally and Amanda and I will stay on to answer those questions if you need to.
Okay. All right, good. And another thing, now I'm going to go into the IPA, or I'm sorry, the formal app, and so this is the application. Are you guys seeing my PowerPoint again?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm going to keep it like this because I'm going to very quickly toggle over to the application. So again, we still want the DDA as the driver. On this one, it's the front sheet rather than the back sheet. That is the cover sheet, and it's going to be signed by only the DDA, not the borrower. And then you're going to have a few more things here. I'm just going to go right into that. I know we're kind of running short on time, and I don't want to keep people late. So, whoops. Okay. Hopefully now you all see a copy of the Ddrlf loan application.
Yes.
So we're going to scroll on down. So this is the cover sheet. The applicant is the DDA. Okay. And then the business starts filling out section number 3. So sections 1 and 2 should be all about the DDA. Section 3 is for the borrower, and it does need to be signed by the DDA, not the borrower, because we do frequently get these signed by the borrower, but it's definitely signed by the DDA. Okay. Now, section B, a lot of these questions here in section B will have already been answered in the narrative that was put in the IPA. And that's fine. It's totally fine to cut and paste the same narrative that you put in the IPA into your formal application. That's totally fine. If the funding changed a little bit, if the bank decided to put in a little more money, or if the borrower had to put a little more money, then we would need a source and use again. This table is kind of important. We do track economic impact of these projects. We don't have minimum levels that have to be met. There's not like a minimum number of jobs that have to be created or a minimum number of square feet, but we do track it and we want to know it. So make sure this is filled out. Again, this is probably going to be provided by the borrower, the information for that table 10. Again, source and use, it's probably going to be the same as what was in your IPA, but if it changed, give us the update. And again, we want Ddrlf to be typically limited to 40% of total project cost. One thing that Cherie and I wanted to point out to you is that one thing you will notice about, I think it's in both the IPA form and the formal application form. The last couple pages will give you a very long and very intimidating list of all these things that have to be submitted. Don't freak out. And do realize that most of the time we don't need all of that. It's rare that we, very, very rare that we need all of that. For the formal application, your borrower really just needs to be concerned about the things that you see a blank template for. So see how we definitely need the credit authorization form to be filled out. There's a template for a personal financial statement. We will need that. There is a template for a, I think it's like a schedule of debts. Okay, we are going to need that. And I think there's also a template for a pro forma. Yes. So we will need the pro forma because we want to see, have you done your homework? Do you have a rough idea of how much money this business is going to make? Because we need to make sure that the borrower can keep up with their loan payments. So if you see a template for it, like these pages that I just scrolled through, the borrower will need to provide those plus their tax forms. But some of those other things that you see listed, do not freak out and don't worry about them, because if we need them, we will let you know, either in the IPA response letter or sometimes after I get a formal app, the credit team will come to me and say, hey, well, we also want to look at this, that, and the other too. But for really, just try not to get overwhelmed. We want it to be simple, and we don't want to ask for more than what's absolutely necessary. So just tell the borrower that for the formal app stage, they will need to supply tax returns, pro forma, basically anything you see a template for. And just don't get overwhelmed with those last couple pages that have like these very lengthy lists. So does anybody have any questions?
Everybody's very quiet today.
I know I'm worried. I don't know if I put everybody to sleep or if I just overwhelmed them with too much detail. I don't know.
All right. Was that your last slide, Sally? Because we are at 11 o'clock.
Yeah, the only other slides that I had were, and they were not, you see. I did have, whoops. I put in sort of like a, this is the non-map version of the regional reps. So I thought
But
it'd be good.
they did get a
map.
copy of the map with the regional
Yeah.
rep contact information as part of those handouts that were emailed to y'all
Right.
yesterday.
And then the final slide is just my contact data. But yeah, that was really all that I intended to cover.
Wendy, do you have a question? Anybody have any questions for Sally or, for Amanda and some of the issues or anything that she's come across? Do you have any questions for either Sally or Amanda?
I just wanted to point out that the document that you gave them, Cherie, the frequently asked questions, that had some good questions and answers about some other important issues that come up. I think there was something on there about conflict of interest. That's a good question to read because in these smaller towns, it's very frequent that the movers and shakers that want to get these blighted businesses filled in with good viable businesses, a lot of times they are so active and so involved that they're actually going to be on the DDA board. That's okay. That's not a deal killer, but it is important for those board members to recuse themselves from any votes or discussions at those DDA board meetings about their project and the Ddrlf. And they should not only recuse themselves from those discussions, but they should ideally leave the room while the project is being discussed and voted on. So it's like I said, in these smaller towns, that's going to happen fairly frequently. Not a problem. Just deal with those procedures to avoid those conflict of interest. And I think also too, go ahead. Somebody had a question, I think.
Well, I was just going to say, we have that situation now with a project that should be closing out in November with you guys. He's a city council member, so I made sure he recused himself when the resolution came through. And at some point in time, I don't know if this is still it's a standard of operating, but putting into the newspaper an official ad that there was no conflict of interest and that dealing with this particular loan because he is a council member, and sometimes we've had a DDA member that's been part of a project.
We
as
haven't
well.
required that in the past, but we have often our closing attorney will require a letter from your DDA attorney that just spells out that there was this conflict of interest, but here's how it was handled, and that person recused himself from,
Right.
Voting or discussion, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
So yeah, that definitely can happen.
Any other questions?
And I just
All
want to
right.
emphasize that we're just, like Amanda was saying, we're here to help. If you have a question about a potential project, just feel free at any time to reach out to your regional rep or to me, either by phone or by email, and we'll try to answer any questions you have. And if we think that for some reason the project is maybe not a good fit for Ddrlf, we, instead of just saying no, we try to say no, but maybe GCF will work, or maybe SSBCI will work, and then we'll try to give you like the names and phone numbers and contact data of those other potential projects as well.
All right. Well, we're past our time, so we'll go ahead and let folks go that want to. But if you want to stay on to ask specific questions about maybe specific projects that you've got going on in your community, we will stay on for a little while. Thank y'all for joining us.